So, welcome to today's deep dive. I'm really excited about this one because we are looking at a massive stack of data.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of information. We're talking about the Global Human Development Reports from like 1990 all the way to 2023.
Right. And our mission today, for you listening, is to basically take a magnifying glass to a single nation. We're looking at Madagascar.
And we're doing that to unpack this really profound, well, honestly, a pretty unsettling paradox about human progress and the environment.
Yeah, unsettling is the right word, because I want you to just imagine something for a second. Try to picture the ultimate green nation, like a place with practically a zero-cost planetary footprint, no massive emissions, no huge ecological stress. What comes to mind?
I mean, most people would picture some kind of futuristic utopia.
Exactly. You think of like frictionless solar grids and high-tech wind farms and brilliant environmental policies.
But here's the reality check. Madagascar actually fits that immaculate green profile perfectly, like to a T.
Wait, really perfectly?
Yes. But they are trapped in this absolute survival nightmare. They rank near the very bottom of global human development.
And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive. We have to figure out why the world's ultimate environmental honors student is stuck in what is basically a living hell.
Yeah.
And what that actually means for how we define success globally. Because I want to paint a visual for you. Picture a split screen in your mind.
Okay.
On the right, you have your typical globally prosperous city. High carbon, hazy skies, tons of traffic, but, hospitals and wealth everywhere.
Right, the booming metropolis.
Yeah. And on the left side of this mental screen, you have Madagascar.
Right.
Crystal clear skies, untouched land. But the people there are struggling just to survive the afternoon.
And what's fascinating here is how this split screen actually plays out mathematically, like in the actual United Nations indices.
Right, because usually we look at the Human Development Index, the HDI.
Exactly. But recently, they started adjusting that for environmental impact to create the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
Okay, so how does that work? Like, if a wealthy nation is destroying the Earth to get rich, what happens?
They get severely penalized. The global average is that a country loses about 10% of its development score because of the damage it does to the planet.
10%. Wow. Okay. And what about Madagascar?
When you adjust Madagascar's score for environmental pressure, their loss rate is a microscopic 1.2%.
Wait, 1.2%?
Yeah, it's virtually nothing compared to the global average of 10%.
So on paper, they look like absolute environmental champions.
They do, and the specific footprints back that up. Look at carbon dioxide. The global average is roughly 4.54 tons of CO2 per capita.
4.5 tons per person, okay.
Madagascar is at 0.148 tons.
I mean, that's barely anything. That's practically a rounding error.
It's a tiny fraction. And it's not just emissions. If you look at the material footprint...
Oh, just like the actual stuff we pull out of the earth, right?
Exactly. Biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores. The global average is 12.71 tons per person. Madagascar is at a mere 2.05 tons.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because this extreme greenness, it's not from a tech revolution, is it?
No, not at all. It is born from a severe lack of consumption. And that lack of consumption is due to extreme, grinding poverty.
So they aren't emitting carbon because they just don't have electricity.
Precisely. They aren't consuming materials because they can't afford to build infrastructure.
It's like, when someone wins a budgeting award because they literally couldn't afford to buy food?
That's a great analogy.
Right. It's not a victory. It's a symptom of starvation. You aren't being frugal if you're starving.
Exactly. And to really understand how severe this lack of consumption is, we have to zoom out. We need to look at the macro trajectory of the world over the last 3 decades.
Let's do that. Because the 30-year chasm here is mind-blowing. If you visualize a line chart of the global HDI from 1990 to 2023...
It's been a steady climb. The world started at an HDI of 0.60 in 1990.
Right.
And by 2023, the global average climbed to 0.756.
Which is a huge leap in human progress. Better medicine, better schools, all of that.
It really is. In fact, the only major disruption globally over those 33 years was the 2020 to 2021 pandemic.
Oh, right, the global recession from COVID.
Yeah. The HDI dropped from 0.745 to 0.742. That was the first continuous decline in recorded history.
Which just shows how much momentum human development usually has. But then let's look at Madagascar's line on that same chart.
Madagascar's 2023 HDI sits at 0.487.
0.487.
They rank 183rd globally.
Wait, but you just said the world's starting line back in 1990 was 0.60.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Over 33 years, human civilization crossed a massive threshold. But Madagascar hasn't even reached the world's starting line from 3 decades ago.
That is just, I mean, that's a literal chasm. That's a vertical gap of 0.269 points between the global average and Madagascar today.
It's a completely different reality.
So on our mental line chart, the world is climbing steadily upward, and Madagascar is just flatlining way down at the bottom, trapped in the past.
Yeah. But, HDI is an abstract number.
Right, it's just math. We need to translate that into actual human lives. Like, what does that 0.269 gap mean for a person waking up in Madagascar today?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the most fundamental baseline of development is healthcare. It's the cost of life.
How long you get to live.
Exactly. The global life expectancy in 2023 is roughly 73.3 years.
Okay, so mid-70s.
Madagascar's life expectancy is 63.63 years.
Wow. So that is essentially a lost decade of human life.
A full 10 years.
I mean, think about what losing a decade means for a society. You lose your elders. You lose the grandparents who help raise the kids. You lose all that institutional knowledge.
And family structures fracture. Plus, they are incredibly vulnerable to shocks. In 2021, Madagascar's life expectancy plummeted even further to 62.5 years.
Because they couldn't handle the global health crisis.
Right. But there's one statistic that truly exposes the fragility of their public health system.
The maternal mortality ratio.
Yes. The MMR, globally, the average is roughly 216 deaths per 100,000 live births.
Which is still a tragic number.
It is. But in Madagascar, it is a terrifying 391.5 deaths per 100,000 live births.
391.5. That is, I mean, is this just about a lack of doctors? Or is this something deeper?
It's a systemic collapse. Maternal mortality is the ultimate test of an entire health system.
Because you need everything to go right.
Exactly. You need trained staff, yes, but you also need sterile environments, you need electricity for incubators, you need a blood supply.
And you need roads. If there's an emergency in the middle of the night, you have to physically get to the clinic.
And if you don't have paved roads or emergency transport, women die. It's that brutal.
So if healthcare is failing on this massive structural level, it points to a huge deficit in national wealth. We have to follow the money here.
Let's do it. We measure this using gross national income, or GNI, per capita, and we adjust it for purchasing power parity, so we're looking at real value.
Right, so what a dollar actually buys on the ground.
Exactly. Globally, the average GNI per capita is about $20,327.
Okay. And Madagascar?
$1,655.76 for 2023.
Oh my God. $1,655 for an entire year.
The average global citizen has roughly 12 times the wealth.
That is just staggering.
And it gets worse. If you look back at the year 2001, Madagascar's wealth was $1,754.
Wait, so their wealth in 2023 is actively lower than it was over 20 years ago?
Yes. They are economically regressing.
Okay, but hang on. Here's where it gets really interesting, because there's a piece of data that seems completely contradictory to all of this.
You're talking about the gender data.
Yeah. I'm looking at the Gender Development Index, the GDI. With all this poverty, you'd expect massive gender inequality, right? Usually, women and girls get marginalized first when resources dry up.
That's the standard assumption, yeah.
But Madagascar's GDI is at 0.934. The global average is 0.955. They are astonishingly close to the global average for gender equality. How is that even possible?
It's a really jarring finding. Because you're right, on a spreadsheet, 0.934 looks like an incredible victory for female empowerment.
Right, it looks like they have super progressive social policies.
But that's an illusion. This isn't high-quality female empowerment. It's a phenomenon we call shared poverty.
Shared poverty. So what does this all mean?
It means men and women have reached a grim synchronization at the absolute bottom.
Ah. So it's like saying everyone on a sinking ship is equally wet.
Exactly.
Equality means absolutely nothing if you're equally deprived. If the men have nothing and the women have nothing, congratulations, you've reached parity.
Right. True gender development implies abundance is being shared. Here they are just sharing destitution.
Okay, but if they are this incredibly poor, does that mean people just aren't working? Like, is the unemployment rate through the roof?
Actually, no. And this brings us to the labor market paradox, which completely shatters our Western economic assumptions.
Okay, lay it on me.
Globally, the female labor force participation rate in 2023 is around 48.47%.
So roughly half of women globally are in the formal workforce.
Right. In Madagascar, the female labor force participation is historically massive. It often exceeds 75 to 80%.
Wait, 80%?
In 2005, it actually hit 84.59%.
That's insane, because if you see an 80% female labor participation rate in a developed country, people celebrate.
Oh, absolutely.
It's viewed as the ultimate sign of a booming economy and workplace equality. We universally assume that high work participation equals empowerment.
But in Madagascar, it is a distress signal.
Because they aren't working in nice office jobs.
No, they are participating at these incredibly high rates because survival dictates that they absolutely must engage in grueling, low-skill agricultural labor.
They are working the fields just to feed their families for the day.
Exactly.
Which completely blows up the myth that hard work automatically equals wealth. You can have a population working themselves to the bone with 80% participation, and they are still regressing economically.
Diligence does not result in prosperity if you don't have infrastructure or education.
And that leads us perfectly into the education gap. Because if physical labor isn't the ticket out of poverty, usually we look at schools.
Right. Education is supposed to be the great equalizer.
So what does the data say about school?
Globally, the expected years of schooling is about 13 years.
Okay, so that gets you through primary and high school, maybe a bit of vocational training?
Exactly. In Madagascar, the expected years of schooling is only 9.06 years.
Which is already low.
It is. But the expected years is just a projection. If you look at the mean years of schooling, the actual time spent in a classroom, it's a devastating 4.59 years.
4.59 years.
Yeah.
Let's just pause on that. That means the average kid barely finishes basic primary school.
They get to about the 5th grade.
And then what? They're pulled out of school.
They are pulled out to join that massive labor force we just talked about.
Oh, wow. So that 80% labor participation rate, that includes these kids who had to drop out at 10 years old to work the fields.
Yes, because their families literally need their physical labor to survive.
I mean, imagine trying to navigate today's global digital economy with the education of a 10-year-old. You can't.
It's an invisible ceiling placed over the entire country. You cannot build a modern, high-value economy when your workforce lacks basic educational foundations. It's the root engine of intergenerational poverty.
And this lack of education, it really feeds directly into this concept I want to talk about next, multidimensional poverty.
This is a crucial metric because poverty isn't just an empty bank account.
Right. So we have the inequality-adjusted HDI, the IHDI.
Yes.
Globally, the average country loses about 21.9% of its HDI to inequality. But Madagascar loses 34.5% of its already tiny HDI.
Which means the few resources they do have are incredibly unevenly distributed.
Exactly. And to measure what that inequality actually feels like daily, we look at the MPI, the Multidimensional Poverty Index.
The MPI headcount in Madagascar shows that 68.4% of the population lives in multidimensional poverty.
Nearly 70% of the country. And the data breaks down what actually causes this multidimensional poverty, right?
It does. Years of schooling is the biggest contributor at 20.7%.
Because of the 4.6-year dropout rate?
Exactly. But look at the next factors. Cooking fuel contributes 9.8%. Sanitation is 9.3%. And electricity is 8.4%.
This raises such an important question about what poverty actually is. Poverty is your physical environment.
It's the daily logistics of survival.
Right. Not having electricity, that 8.4%, or clean cooking fuel, that 9.8%, that means hours of your day are just completely wasted.
You are scavenging for wood.
Yes. You have to walk miles to find firewood, carry it back, build a fire indoors, and then the smoke inhalation from that indoor fire ruins your health.
Which loops right back to the horrific maternal mortality and the lost decade of life expectancy. It's all connected.
So we can't just throw money at their GDP. It's an infrastructure trap.
Completely.
You have to fix the grid, the pipes, and the schools simultaneously. You can't have a modern hospital without electricity.
You can't keep vaccines cold without a grid.
And here's the massive catch. This brings us right back to our opening paradox.
The environmental dilemma.
Yes, because if you want to fix the grid, build sanitation pipes, pave roads for ambulances, and build modern schools, what do you need?
You need concrete. You need steel. You need massive amounts of energy.
Which usually means burning fossil fuels and building factories.
Exactly.
So let's look at the PHDI again. When you adjust for planetary pressures, wealthy nations drop in the rankings.
But Madagascar actually moves UP3 spots globally.
They get a gold star from the international community for being green.
Because they only emit 0.15 tons of CO2.
But the roadmap out of this poverty trap-boosting education past 4.6 years, building the energy infrastructure to stop multidimensional poverty, and dropping that 391.5 maternal mortality rate, All of that requires development.
Which outlines the core moral dilemma of the 21st century.
Right.
If sustainability is achieved by forcing nations to remain in extreme poverty, is it ethical?
It's absolutely not ethical. If Madagascar implements the roadmap to save its people, its carbon footprint will inevitably rise.
And they will lose their status as an environmental honors student.
I mean, I have to address you directly, the listener. We have to completely redefine success here. Low carbon cannot be a synonym for a low quality of life.
The world celebrates their low-carbon status, but the Malagasy people are paying for that status with their lives.
It's infuriating. The global community got rich by burning carbon. We built our 73-year life expectancies by burning coal and oil.
And now the developed world is turning around and saying, sorry, the carbon budget is full. You have to dissolve sustainably.
It's like we ate the entire banquet, and now we're telling the latecomers they have to go on a diet.
That's exactly what it is.
If we demand they grow cleanly, the global community must provide the technology and the funding for Madagascar to leapfrog the dirty industrial phase.
They cannot do it alone on a GNI of $1,655 a year.
So let's recap this whole journey. We started with this illusion of a green utopia.
And we peeled it back to see the 30-year economic chasm.
The rest of the world marched to an HDI of 0.756, and Madagascar is flatlining at 0.487.
We saw the true cost. Lost life expectancy, failing healthcare, and the illusion of shared poverty.
We saw how 80% labor participation isn't a victory, it's an agricultural survival trap.
And how a 4.6-year education average locks almost 70% of the country in multidimensional poverty.
So the ultimate goal of development isn't just making a spreadsheet look green.
No. The ultimate goal is human freedom. The freedom to live a long life, to be educated, to have choices.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Okay.
If the developed world used up almost the entire global carbon budget to build their own wealthy, high HDI societies over the last century, do they now owe the developing world a carbon debt?
Wow.
Should wealthy nations be entirely financially responsible for building Madagascar's green infrastructure as repayment?
That is the defining question for the next 50 years of global policy.
It really is. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive into the data with us. We encourage you to keep questioning the real human stories hidden behind these global indexes. Because sometimes the greenest nation on Earth is actually just crying out for help.
Thanks for listening.
Think about that carbon debt. We'll catch you next time.